Times Radio Breakfast.
Listen to Times Radio on your smart speaker. Just say, play Times Radio.
Early breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio with Elavon. Whatever size your business is, Elavon has a payment solution for you. Find out more at elavon.co.uk.
Well, the Times has that story that refugees will be stopped from able to bring their families here to the UK. The Daily Telegraph has a large photograph of Rachel Reeves, but the headline is "Smiling Through the Pain." The paper says the Chancellor is putting on a brave face after being frozen out by Starmer. The Guardian says the Prime Minister is trying to regain policy control from the Treasury in this number 10 shake-up. And The Sun says strictly fat jabs alert. 5 celebs have been taking fat jabs ahead of the new series, sparking fears they will fail to go the distance because they won't have been eating enough calories and be too tired, I think is the implication. Andrew Eborn, the barrister broadcaster, president of Octopus TV, is here to go through the papers with me. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Always a delight to join you.
Shall we start with the Chancellor, who is smiling on the front page of the Telegraph? The Times, though, has an interesting piece, a comment piece from Patrick Maguire. He always writes brilliantly, and it says, new hires cannot fill the strategy vacuum at the heart of number 10. Would you say there's an absence of strategy? It seems actually that the government are absolutely desperate to find some solutions.
Well, they're certainly desperate, and as people have pointed out, it was 40 years since the discovery of the Titanic, and they're obviously doing the comparison about rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. What's interesting is the piece, it's been assumed lazily that the belated arrival of 2 economists and a Treasury minister in Downing Street amounts to an attack on Rachel Reeves. Inside government, another theory is that which took hold on Monday, is in fact it's a reverse takeover of the Prime Minister's office by the Chancellor. But certainly what he's doing, he's getting these experts in. There is this worry about the economics. He's looking at over the sort of the key issues that are affecting the electorate. They're obviously concerned about change, but the most important change is the change in their pockets and other such issues. And I think this is what he's trying to do. He's trying to appeal to the electorate and trying to get this sort of second phase where he's trying to get them back on side, if you like.
Yeah, he said, I get the frustration and anger of voters because they want change and saying, I want to deliver that change as quickly as possible. So they're sort of saying, yeah, they're into the next phase of government where they're about delivery. So we'll be able to see if that happens. He was also asked, wasn't he, yesterday, the Prime Minister, about flags, and it's been written up in the Times today. And the Prime Minister said, don't devalue the St George's flag. We have one at home. He says they're being used for divisive purposes. Do you fly a flag at home, Andrew?
Oh, I never leave home without one. I think this is the thing. We should be proud of our history. We should be proud of our nation and so on and so forth. And as he rightly says, although it sounds like empty words, the English flag is being devalued and belittled by those who are using it to divide the country. Well, who's using it to divide the country? I think what's happened is when people are saying...
Well, we know who. We've had all the protests that have been, at some points, have descended into violence. There have been arrests and people have got the St George's flag or the Union Jack with them.
I think there's probably a very, very small minority. I think the majority of people, certainly people who listen to the wonderful breakfast show, will be very proud of our history and so on and so forth, and would fly it with pride. So it's basically a symbol of sort of nationalism. It's not meant as a divisive aspect. And I think that's the key. It's all about intention, isn't it? And I think being proud of where you're from is really, really key. But a small minority should not dictate what the majority feel about their sense of pride.
Would you fly a flag outside your house?
I probably wouldn't be allowed for planning permission, Rosie, but I would be happy to. Would you?
Oh, I don't think there's planning permission rules. But councils have, and that's partly what's caused the problem as well. Councils have been taking down flags. We've had a text in from David, who has sent me a picture of his desk in Bristol with the Welsh flag flying proudly on his desk. He said, I was very pleased as well to see the flag of St George flying from lampposts on Knoll Lane when I was driving to the office. They are still there. Let me know this morning if you would fly a flag at home. Do you agree with the Prime Minister when he says they're being used for divisive purposes? He is talking about those anti-immigration protests that have continued. Let me know. You can WhatsApp the programme 0333 003 2353. Now, we've heard from the Justice Secretary, Andrew, this is written up in the paper as well, that ministers will have sort of the final say, the right to veto over sentencing guidelines. This is Shabana Mahmood, of course. Remember, there was that story a few months ago when the sentencing guidelines changed and politically they were going to be very uncomfortable for the Labour government. So Shabana Mahmood now says, right, actually, we will exercise final control when you make those recommendations.
Yeah, so what happens? I always say that justice should be done, but also seen to be done. And this was the system. What happened? They were going to introduce this thing where they say that you have to take into account on certain circumstances, things like race and so on and so forth, to make sure that those are sort of built in to sentencing when the judges have it. Now, the sentencing policies, what it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be that every single judge would come up with the same decision in terms of sentencing, which is why they started to televise. They always sort of, I say that trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback, and trust in the judiciary was at an all-time low when you have these massive reports about lenient sentences and so on and so forth. So what the Sentencing Council did was to establish, if you like, this tariff that people looking at it would turn around and give the same defendant, the person who's been actually accused and found guilty, the same penalty, whichever judge it was. And that was what happened. What was going to be introduced is this sort of concept that you have to take into account race and so on and so forth when you're looking at judgment. Now, the optics on that are obviously not very good because it leads to this accusation again about a two-tier system. But certainly what judges have to do, and this is the important point, they have to take into account the person who is in front of them when they're looking at the sentences. And that's what they do. They have this range of tariffs for sentencing, which takes into those sort of factors. And I say it's all about the messaging, if you like. How's that going to work in practice?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the Justice Secretary was caught very unaware and very last minute when those guideline changes were announced. So they were very keen to get back on top of that. A success, actually, in the papers today. There'll be more on this on Times Radio Breakfast as well. 7 months into the dispute in Birmingham, where residents were not having their bins picked up with anywhere near the regularity they had been before because of the strike, the council have cleared all the rubbish. Tell us what's happened, Andrew.
Well, it's exactly that. And the unions are going to hate this because they're all hoping it's going to carry on till Christmas and so on and so forth. And you used to have these horrible pictures of rubbish being stacked really high and rats and so on and so forth. What's happened is the council's contingency plans have overcome staff shortages caused by the strike, and they've enabled them to clear the backlog. And what they're doing is they've got the routine use of agency staff who are unable to strike without losing pay. And that's obviously helped the city's waste management firm to weather the storm. So obviously, it's sort of ironic, if you like, and they make it clear in the Times article that given Labour's planned employment rights bill will give 0 hours workers the right to a guaranteed hours contract reflecting their hours over a 12-week reference period. What's going to happen is they've managed to get around it. They're using these agency staff. They're not having to use the workers. And so it could very well backfire.
Well, from the strikers, for sure. I mean, you realise if you've undertaken strike action for 7 months to then realise, well, the problem's become so entrenched. What's happened is they've decided, all right, we're not going to deal with the strikers. We'll just find a workaround around you. It has sort of somewhat undermined the impact of the strike. More on that a little bit later. Now, there's an interesting dispatch from Adam Sage, the Times Paris correspondent, in the paper today about fortune tellers. The fortune-telling industry, this is quite amazing, is estimated to be worth €3 billion a year because there is so much demand for it. And what's happened is actually the government have realised we've got to regulate the fortune tellers, which is quite a tricky thing to do, I'd imagine.
Well, and this is what's happened. The French authorities have woken up, if you like. What's happened is the National Institute of Divinatory Arts, the INAD, estimate that 3/4 of the country's 100,000 or so fortune tellers are incompetent and dishonest. And the other quarter, you've got to sort of work on what sort of basis. They've had a few whistleblowers internally where people who work for a particular organisation were earning about €84,000 a year. But they were saying they were forced by the particular company to to keep people on the phone, because that's being charged at an extortionate rate, by basically fear. Look, we've got the solution to all of your problems. Stay on the phone and we're going to be able to do this. And people were being targeted and so on and so forth. It's an industry which you had to be very, very careful of. And the way they advertise it now, they say it's for entertainment purposes only. Harry Houdini, as you know, I'm a member of the Magic Circle. And Harry Houdini very famously spent his life debunking these people, ever since one particular medium turned up and said, look, he can contact his dead mother. And he realised that he was being conned out of lots and lots of money. People take a lot of comfort from these sort of things. I understand that.
It's preying on people's vulnerabilities in such a cruel way.
That's exactly the point. And this is the sickening thing. And this is what Harry Houdini pointed out all those years ago. He was in a very, very down position in terms of just lost his mother. He was very, very vulnerable. Somebody comes along and said, look, I can contact your mother from the other side. People go along for that. And people should go with their eyes open. This is a good start from the French authorities.
Yeah, one of these fortune tellers was told they could earn £84,000 a year with one of these companies, but was so busy she didn't have time to go to the bathroom, and that some of the strategies the company who'd hired her were saying is, look, you need to pressure customers into these long, expensive, repeated telephone consultations, you know, maybe talking for up to 15 hours a day. I mean, it sounds absolutely awful. Couple of final things I want to talk to you about very quickly, Andrew. This Polish millionaire has got himself in extremely hot water because he was at the US Open. The tennis player who finished the game was giving his hat to a child that they could take home as a memento. And the man next to the child leant over, snatched it, snaffled it, put it in his bag. And now the digital eye is always on you. That was caught on camera. He's been exposed and had to apologise.
I'm quite right too, and well done to the internet and keeping eyes on people. They tracked down this particular person, but not since Boris Johnson steamrolled a 10-year-old boy on a Japanese rugby pitch has an adult's churlish disregard of a child's feelings so mesmerised the internet, as it says in the Times article. They tracked down the CEO. He came up with all sorts of excuses, quite pathetic, some of them. He said, look, in the emotion of the moment, I was convinced the tennis player was handing the cap in my direction for my sons, who'd earlier asked for autographs. Well, I don't know how he would have done that. It was quite clear he stole it from the boy. I'm delighted that the player concerned has now got in touch with the boy. He's got lots of these caps, and he's made the boy
given
feel
him
very,
another
very special.
one. I know. Oh, it is so embarrassing. It has slight echoes of the Coldplay concert saga, doesn't it? Where you do something pretty shameful and haven't realised that someone's filmed you at the same time. Very embarrassing.
Yes.
I think he is extremely apologetic, as you can imagine. Final thing, it's been a very hot summer. We're going to talk about that in a moment or two. Young people, though, have been putting ice in their beer, says the Times. That sounds horrible.
Well, it's crazy, isn't it? And this is what happens. Yes, you can put it in your whiskey and it will open the whiskey up for you. But actually, it's diluting it. So this is exactly what's happening is the youngsters, as they're saying, is making the traditionalists squirm by putting ice in beer and so on and so forth. I understand when it's very, very hot. The secret is have cold glasses. That will keep your
cold beer.
Exactly. So start with cold beer. Well, actually, some beer should be warm. That's how they enjoy it. But the reality is that if you put ice in it, it's going to dilute it. It's not going to be how it's supposed to be enjoyed.
Yeah, some of them are putting 35% of Gen Z are putting ice in their red wine as well. Maybe in a rosé, I could tolerate that. Landlord said ice in beer is, as a trend, is being imported from France. Well, there we go. Yesterday baguettes, today beer. Andrew, it's been a pleasure. Andrew Eborn, the barrister, broadcaster, futurist, president of Octopus TV, going through the papers with me.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.